Welcome to Nina's Excerpts from the Experts, 7-minute learning sessions with researchers and practitioners in the field of eating disorders, and individuals and families who share their experiences and perspectives. I'm your host, Sarah Bowie-Keaton. This week, our guest is Rocio Avila. She is a licensed clinical social worker with over 12 years of experience in medical social work. She currently works with Varied Health, a virtual health provider providing eating recovery services. Rocio brings a unique perspective with a focus on eating disorders specific to the Latino community. Rocio, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Are there specific issues that the Latino community face that may lead them to develop an eating disorder?
So like most of the population, Latinos are facing mental health issues like depression, anxiety, PTSD, a multitude of issues along with eating disorders. And so unfortunately, we don't talk about it very much. And so what happens is, there's a lot of stigma still, especially in the culture, to talk about general mental health problems like depression and anxiety. So eating disorders can seem like an even much more pressure topic, stigma topic among the culture, because food can be a big central a focus, a component to the culture and the day to day. And so on top of having the stigma of talking about mental health, now we're talking about food, which can be so central to the culture. There are specific issues, though, that are pertinent to the Latino culture, to people, members of the Latino community, that could lead them to developing an eating disorder. Issues such as acculturative stress and the acculturative process to this country or to a new place that is unfamiliar, because in that process, there's also a grief period. And there's a lot of comparison into trying to adapt and fit into a way of life that is not the norm. There's also the migration journey. There are many Latino people who have migrated here, and in this journey had to deal with disordered eating patterns, such as maybe eating one meal a day, food insecurities, such as lack of access to food because of the journey. And that can continue for years even after arrival. And so these patterns that develop in the journey of maybe arriving to this new country or to a new place really can go on for several years, and they can even be passed down, these practices, and even trauma responses to the journey of where am I going to get my next meal from, get passed down. These transgenerational traumas and responses that we talk about sometimes. And so there are some very specific situations that can happen for people of the Latino community that we don't even realize, that either because we experienced it firsthand or maybe our relatives experienced it and they had to, they pass that along to us. Now we're left with this, to deal with, on top of sometimes the comorbidities, like I mentioned, of depression, anxiety, and other illnesses.
What are some of the reasons that the Latino community may be less inclined to seek treatment?
So, as I mentioned before, Latinos are facing the same issues as the general population, however, are not being treated at the same rate. And when we talk about access to treatment, that is an important factor to consider. Latinos often do not have the same access as others, whether it's because of cost and financial barriers or a gap in health insurance coverage and just what that looks like, that disparity. Um, Language barriers can also create lack of access. Logistical access, such as work conflicts, if someone's working 2 or 3 jobs, trying to find time to go to appointments can be very difficult. Transportation limitations, there's a multitude of reasons, of barriers that someone can face with just getting access to treatment. Then on top of that, we add a general mistrust for the system itself, because, historically it hasn't really quite been designed to provide access, just providing materials in someone's language of origin, or having providers that understand the language and the culture. And so that can discourage someone when you combine that with the stigma that's already there, to can really turn someone away from looking into services and treatment. However, it doesn't mean that is necessarily the answer. In the Latino culture, there's also tends to be this mentality is, I have to figure this out on my own. I got to do it on my own. There's this resiliency. There are resiliency traits and components that can be good and serve a purpose, but can also get in the way when people feel like I have to figure it out by myself. I have to do this on my own. That might come from this survival mentality, right? I was talking about that migration journey of just, I have to figure this out. However, eating disorders are such that they really do need the support of a team, and they need intervention from professionals. And so I think that sometimes um, that inclination to not seek treatment, on top of the various factors of the general mistrust, the lack of access, the stigma, um, can be barriers for someone to get that support that they need. Um, and so when we're dealing with eating disorders, they can go unnoticed in the Latino population, and often untreated, which, when you add all the things that I mentioned on top of the fact that we're talking about food, it can all make it to this one big overwhelming, looming thing maybe, that makes people feel like, I don't know what to do with this, and maybe don't even know where to begin. And so it can create a lot of barriers and challenges, I think, for any one person that might find, I might be dealing with an eating disorder here.
That's difficult to address. But on the other end of barriers to access, like logistics of transportation, working around work schedules, school schedules, is telehealth an option? Is it an effective tool for treatment for eating disorder?
Absolutely. I think telehealth is really, it's a new wave to bring that access to people. And not only are we talking about connecting just providers to folks in communities where access is limited, but we can also now bring culturally competent and culturally sensitive providers to these very specific regions, just because we all can't be everywhere at once, right? So now telehealth is really a good connector for a multitude of people who identify as different, either races, ethnicities, identities, and being able to connect with people who can see that lens, see that perspective, who feel like competent in those areas, and increase that access and decrease those barriers.
What should Latino families know when looking for eating disorder treatments and clinicians?
I think it's important to know that, as we're talking about here, that finding those providers can be limited, and recognizing that, we might have to look at different options like telehealth, in person, in different regions even. So kind of looking past those traditional models of finding someone in, a block or two around. So that's the first part of finding access where we can find it. I think finding providers that are culturally sensitive and humble, and provide a lens that is not only from a trauma-informed care perspective, but that cultural sensitivity and cultural humility. I think those are things that families should be looking out for, because they want to find someone who can connect and understand. And I'm not saying that it has to be someone that is of the same culture. It's a clinician that is trained in a way that can be culturally humble and sensitive to the needs of the family before them. And so that involves a clinician that can hear the family and their individual needs, that can be flexible to meet their needs, that can ideally get them resources in their language of origin, whether it's information about psychotherapy, pharmacotherapy, nutrition. Even if the clinician does not understand the language, it's like, hey, tell me what you're feeling and how you're feeling it in your language, and then we can break it down later. So things like that I think are important concepts for families to be looking out for when they're maybe connecting with new clinicians and they're trying to determine, is this a good fit? Is also think about culture and how that is going to play a role, and keep that in mind when connecting with a new provider.
That was great information. I really appreciate your time and giving your perspectives for the Latino community. And I hope that this was really helpful to the families and individuals watching.
Thank you so much. Me too.
NEDA's mission is to support individuals and families affected by eating disorders and serve as a catalyst for prevention, cures, and access to quality care. NEDA offers programs and services designed to help you find the help and support you need. Whether you have been personally affected by an eating disorder or care about someone who has, recovery is possible, and we're here to support you.